In my case, I chose clinical biochemistry. So following the exam, I began my residency at the hospital clinic, and I am already midway through my third year, with only one more year to go before becoming a specialist. And it was during this initial period after finishing my degree and deciding to study the beer that I found myself feeling quite alone, in the sense that I didn't know anyone who had chosen this path, and I had many uncertainties. So I turned to social media, specifically Instagram, to see if there was any account providing information or sharing experience. And to my surprise, all I found were profiles of academies explaining their prices and courses, but nothing about what my study period would be like, whether it could be challenging or pass quickly. I also found nothing about how difficult it was to get a position, whether some succeeded in the first year or if it could be required dedicating many years of my life. Moreover, there was a lack of advice on how to approach the study, how to maintain a steady pace through the study season. To compound this, there was a lack of motivation. I couldn't find any profile that inspired me to strive for the position. I didn't even know if the syllabus I was going to study would be related to what I would be working on afterward. So, well, in the following period, once I had taken the exam, I had positive feelings about it, but I didn't know if I had secured a position or if I could choose my dream hospital. So I turned to social media again and once more encountered lack of information. In this case, no one explained the experience of how the distribution of positions occur, how it was organized, what I should do. I also had no information from anyone about the different specialties and how each of them differ. I could only access official documents, but I wanted a real life perspective. Lastly, I couldn't find support from someone who had already been through that situation to tell me how to cope with the uncertainty and anxiety of not knowing if all my effort would be worthwhile or not. Finally, I secured a position in my first year, and I was able to choose the hospital I want, the clinic of Barcelona. And it was during the early days of my residence, and for the third time that I once again encountered a lack of information. Imagine if there were already few people on social media dedicated to preparing for the exam, with the limited positions available annually for residents, even fewer individuals who had completed their residence and were dedicated to disseminating information about the entire process. So I had many questions without any answer, such as what is the role of the resident, what training does a resident have, what is the life of a resident, and the most important, what's after residence. And in addition to all of that, I also realized the lack of awareness on the part of doctors from other specialties about what we do in the lab and the process that occurs until the results reach them. So with all this, I made an intentional market research, and it helped me figure out what kind of account I want to create and what focus I want to have. I identified the needs that other might encounter along the way. So the name I chose for creating my account was Superviviente, which means survivor, and it's a play on words because instead of using a P, I replace it with P to include the word beer, which is the name of the exam. So initially, I created the account to advise all those people considering taking the beer, helping them both academically, for example, if they have questions about the syllabus, and personally, if they feel anxious or demotivated, etc. Additionally, I want to raise awareness at the general population level about laboratory medicine, and I started the account 2.5 years ago. And since then, I've been gradually and enthusiastically growing the community. Well, once the account was created, I had to consider what audience I want. Initially focusing on students in healthcare fields and non-laboratory personnel. Later, I expanded to also reach hospital staff and the general population because in reality, all the outreach I do is interesting and beneficial for any type of audience. The second point, and you must be clear about when opening a new profile, is the type of content you want to publish and the goal behind it. In my case, as I mentioned earlier, the goal was to provide information about the beer and everything it entails, explain the role of residents in the hospital, highlight the importance of the laboratory in disease diagnostic, and provide general information for all type of audience. So the next step is think about the type of content you are going to post. First, I share mnemotechnic rules of the exam syllabus. I create these during my study period, and I believe they help simplify complex concepts. In fact, I still use many of them in my daily practice, such as determining which urinary crystals form in basic pH or which in acidic pH. And I thought that if they had helped me back, then they could also assist other in my position. Secondly, and to keep people informed, I post essential information about the exam, including important dates throughout the year and the number of positions offered each year, and additionally useful data like analysis by autonomous community and breakdown by specialty, etc. Furthermore, I share posts about my daily life as a resident, interesting clinical cases, information on diagnostic pathologies, and experiences from conference. This type of content is more directed towards residents from other hospitals or different specialties, helping them understand how we work at my hospital and the laboratory techniques we use. And lastly, I publish scientific information for a general audience. I take advantage of international days related to science to explain information about them. For example, on February 4th, that is International Cancer Day, I post a video explaining the laboratory roles in diagnostic of this disease. Or, for example, on February 11th, which is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, I compiled information about women scientists throughout history to give them recognition. Okay, so we have already seen the type of post I make. Now let's move on to the formats. Instagram is a social media platform that allows for various posting formats, and I believe it's highly beneficial to use all of them. Firstly, we have stories, are posted in either video or photo format where we can use stickers like polls, questions, and boxes, gifts, etc. They only last for 24 hours unless you add them to your highlights, making them accessible wherever someone wants to view them. Secondly, we have reels, are like video posts that you can last up to 90 seconds and often receive a positive response. Next, we have the traditional post where the format involves image, usually between 1 and 10, allowing followers to swim and read all the information. And lastly, there are live videos, which are real-time broadcasts lasting up to 1 hour. And they enable you to interact with your followers in real time and you can save these videos on your profile in case someone wants to review them later. My recommendations for making them useful for followers are to make them interactive. As I mentioned it earlier, you can put stickers for the stories, and what I usually do is post questions in them, whether in the form of a poll like this one, an image of the pathologic cell asking followers to identify it, such as outside, or pictures of biological fluids where I ask if they think that there are signs of malignancy. I also use questions box where I ask a question and followers respond. It's crucial to provide feedback on whether the answer they give are correct or not, and then offer a further explanation to solidify the knowledge. And finally, I also use stories to provide explanation of clinical cases that I come across during my shifts, especially cases that are highly visual and can be explained with a microscope photos, for instance. And remember the importance of posting stories daily and to position yourself among the top accounts for your followers. And if you generate quality content for your audience and engage them with your stories, Instagram algorithm will regard your account by expanding its reach. Okay, now let's move on to talking about Reels. Thanks to Instagram algorithms, Reels allow us to reach a much larger audience than our followers. So I try to use them to attract new followers. I use the hook technique that to get more views on a video, you need to engage the audience in the first 5 seconds. So you should use what is called hook, such as posing questions to generate interest and encourage viewers to keep watching the video. In my case, I use Reels to create short videos about the conference I attend and to explain what a day in the life of a resident is like. In both cases, followers tell me that it motivates them a lot to continue studying for the exam. I also share general interest topics such as which application to use to improve your presentation or post. And additionally, I address controversies that arise in the healthcare world. Throughout all of this, I always try to use trending audios with background music to make it more dynamic. Regarding posts, one of the most important things is to have attractive covers, as it's the first thing the audience will see. Based on the cover, they will decide whether to scroll and keep viewing the other image or not even read it. So no matter how good is the information you're going to share, if it's not visual appealing, it won't have the effective outreach. Another piece of advice is to save posts that you find interesting using the save option. Sometimes we open Instagram when we want to disconnect and may not want to read scientific topic. However, if something seems interesting, save it. This way you will also help the content creator know what you like they post and found it helpful. In my case, for example, I often check how many people save each type of post to see which content is most useful to my followers. And finally, we come to live. And live can be used to create open scientific discussion for the entire audience. It's a real-time space where you can bring up a topic, express your opinion on it, and see what your followers think. You can use it to provide advice, answer questions, etc. As an Instagram consumer, I believe live are very interesting when you want to learn more about the topic being discussed. It's the closest thing to a symposium on a specific subject. And in order to have an active audience in live, it's important to let the followers know in advance so that they can organize and reserve that time or think about the questions they want to ask during the session, etc. Therefore, my advice is to announce it at least a week in advance using a story or a post. Having explained all the type of content, let's see what social networks allow us in terms of disclosure. In my case, I usually do all my posts in Spanish, but despite this, I have an international audience who I am followed by people from many Spanish-speaking countries. Instagram in its insights allows you to see which countries your followers are mostly from, and that can also allow you to explain one type of information or another. Maybe in this case, it's better to do outreach in English because information you give can be understood by many more people from different countries. And continue with this topic, what can we do to ensure that our content reach as many people as possible? So first of all, your target audience cannot be too specific. At the beginning of making my Instagram account, my thought was to focus exclusively on people who were preparing for the period. But as the years have gone by, I have realized that I can teach and share useful information for the entire population. Secondly, use clear and easy to understand explanation. It is very important that in all your posts you explain the content in a simple way so that a larger group of people can understand the message you want to give. We must take into account that social networks are usually consumed in free time. So if we make long and boring publications that are not very understandable, the audience will not read them. And lastly, try to make quality content, being rigorous but making science available to everyone. Use fresh information. You have to be aware of recent news, provide quality content, and in my opinion, giving a point of humor makes the public feel closer to you and tend to interact more with your content. Almost at the end, and let's talk about possible problem. We have a very useful which we can reach a lot of people, but it's also very important content in a friendly and easy to consume way. You can use image, infographics, and short videos to explain scientific concepts and stories and life. Let us to interact in a real time with the audience and answer questions, provide updates on scientific developments. So that's all, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Judith, for sharing with us and preparing your presentation how laboratory medicine can be followed and published at Instagram. I wish you a successful future with your followers, and all the questions asked in the chat box will be answered by Judith at the end of this webinar. Now, it is my special privilege to announce our second speaker, Professor Joe El Khoury. Joe is an associate professor of laboratory medicine and director of clinical chemistry laboratory at Yale USA, and he is also social media editor for the journal Clinical Chemistry and host of his YouTube channel called Clinical Chemistry with Joe Elcoury that infuses medical laboratory science with comedy. Joe will explain how to use YouTube and X for effective science communication in lecture titled Effective Science Communication on YouTube and X. Looking forward to take a tip how to become a YouTuber from you, Joe, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tara. So hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. Thank you for the hosts for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk about what's happening in the world of social media, because it's, even though it's been around for a while for everyone else in science and especially lab medicine, it feels, as Judith mentioned, like this is kind of new. There's not a lot of information out there. And similar to her personal journey and why she started Instagram, I felt the same way when I was looking, for better ways of communicating science. And I simply turned to other forms, which is YouTube and X, which is formerly known as Twitter, and which I'll be talking about today. But I do want to mention, if you're interested or are on X or YouTube, the handles are on the bottom. It's at ClinChemJoe for me, at clean_chem_ADLM for the Clinical Chemistry Journal, which I also manage. And then the YouTube channel is also at ClinChemJoe. So if you're familiar with these, one thing I would recommend is subscribing, because that's how you increase engagement, get notifications. And it's really at no benefit to us except to show that the channel or the social media account is useful and how we justify for our continued support for these efforts, as I'll mention later. But first, to talk about why I felt the need to do this and what's the problem that we're trying to solve, is really that there's a general drop. At least this is a study that was done by the Pew Research Center, which does a lot of these surveys. And it's important to notice that over time, generally scientists are very well trusted, and medical scientists compared to other branches. And we'll say, if you look at in dark blue is how many answered and percent that they trusted them a great deal versus a fair amount in light blue. And then in green is not too much or no confidence at all. And as you can see, the confidence is generally high, only less than generally 15 to 20% distrust medical scientists. Whereas when COVID happened and a year later, generally that trust went down significantly. And we can talk about why that happened and what was happening. And as obviously everyone is aware of, the spread of misinformation targeting medical scientists and medical science in general was why the public lost trust in science over things that were said and done or promises that were not kept. But if you feel bad about this, I would just suggest you don't, because I'll share the other bottom side of this is our elected officials who are peddling this information in some cases really have a lot of distrust from the public, almost 75% do not trust them. And in general, even business leaders and elected officials, and sadly, journalists are also in that realm. It's just to say that overall we're doing well, but that loss of confidence was concerning to me, and kind of how do we address that? So this really led to understanding kind of what was going on. And if you look at the kind of rise of misinformation during COVID, I mean, there were people who were promoting all sorts of solutions that did not make sense, that were not obviously supported by the science, including inhaling steam with a towel, would help, or suggest injecting bleach, as was done by our own president here in the US, or even others were saying drinking vodka would resolve it, or taking ivermectin, which basically is a veterinary drug. And so it has outcome and it has impact on people, especially what leaders say. Because again, even though you think people don't trust leaders, as I mentioned, there's still a small group that does trust them and they follow them and take their word very seriously. So you had, tragically, some Americans were drinking bleach as a result. Tragically, you've had people take ivermectin as a result. And again, in India, they mentioned cow dung being as a form of treatment. And I'm not picking and choosing country. As I mentioned, I'm also mentioning the US primarily because I'm based in the US. This happened everywhere. And I'm just sharing a couple of examples here to kind of highlight some of the things we consider absurd, but they were rapidly spreading in the population because of these, sadly, misinformation. So I kind of teamed up in clinical chemistry and did this Q&A where I invited experts to try to understand this problem better. And here we have Holden Thorpe, who was editor-in-chief of Science So Richard Toffel, who was past president of ProPublica, which is a journalist, which is basically a journal, and then Joseph Ross, who's the founder of Medex RIV, which is a preprint, and he's also a professor at Yale and senior editor at BMJ. And Apurva Mandavili, who's a New York Times journalist interested in global health, and Eric Topol, who's a renowned cardiologist and also at the Scripps Institute, who has a huge social media following on Twitter with over 600,000 people who follow his updates on different science communication. So I do want to share some quotes that we basically directly took from the journal and translated into our social media posts on X. So this is helpful on both fronts, because it shows you what are some examples of things we did to communicate the messages in our journal, but also things they said that are relevant to why we should all be engaged in science communication. So starting with Apurva, basically, essentially, she basically said scientists have an ethical obligation to talk about their research, particularly when it impinges on people's lives in some significant way. And if you think, I mean, COVID is an obvious example where people are trying to find solutions and making recommendations. But many of us involved in medical science are doing research or probably coming up with new approaches that can help people. And so it's important to raise awareness, and even if it's not within, let's say, the public, but even within our own communities, so that these best practices can be adopted. Another quote from Eric Topol, he says, ideally, all scientists would help weigh in with evidence-based information and insights to help the public counter those with malicious or ill intent. It's important to recognize that we have a big role to play in countering misinformation. This is not simply going to be based on a few journalists or a few kind of leaders trying to dispel this. It really takes all of us to fight and share true information, or what we believe is the best available at the time, with others to counter the misinformation that's spreading. I myself can attest to family members reaching out through, whether it's WhatsApp or through social media, people reaching out, asking questions about what's happening in the world when COVID happened. It's our responsibility as scientists to really understand a little bit more about what's happening and can help with dispelling what is not truth versus what is evidence-based. The other thing Apurva mentioned, which is misinformation spreads for many reasons, and it thrives in the absence of good information. Just another reason why we need to be taking an active role. And again, Eric, unfortunately, it has been well documented that misinformation spreads at a much higher velocity and more broadly than truth and facts. So our best shot at preventing its harm is all working together. With that in mind, really, the lesson I want to send home here is we all need to be proactive in sharing our science with each other and the public, especially when it's relevant to the public. So that's really what drove me to kind of first jump on YouTube. So we'll start with that, where I created a channel with the focus being clinical chemistry. And really, this isn't intended to be a public-facing channel. This is for my own community with the goal of changing clinical laboratory practice. So I post two types of videos. The first three are science-based, where I choose one topic like pseudohyponatremia, acute kidney injury, or ALT reference intervals in the first three episodes. Those are topics where our team has identified issues and where we've published papers making recommendations for changes. And so it's similar to Last Week Tonight format, if you're familiar with John Oliver, who does this on HBO, and they're also available on YouTube, which I highly recommend. I liked the format I was seeing, and really the need for this for me was I wish there was something like it in our field, and at some point I just decided to create it, and that was the inspiration behind this. And on the other side, I was also recommended to add other voices to the channel, so it's not just me speaking about topics our team knows about, but also other experts who come join me and we record interviews about topics they're expert in. So these are more interview formats that cover things from publications in journal with AI coming that we've covered with our editor-in-chief for clinical chemistry, Dr. Jason Park. With Dr. Eugenio Zabaleta, we talked about kind of how to work with nursing teams. And Dr. Alan Wu was about traumatic brain injury markers that were coming out. So it's meant to deal with the latest science, and some of it is kind of scientific core, others are interviews to share. And it's important for me to say that I did choose comedy as a form to communicate my science, simply because, as you did mention, you don't want this to be boring. There's so much content out there, and why are people gonna come to you? And to me, like, and kind of watching John Oliver and enjoying it, I recognize it's something I do in my downtime. So I felt like the need to create these videos that would be something somebody would enjoy watching on their downtime, not at work. So hence why kind of adding the hint of comedy and trying to keep the language more informal and to reach the audience more easily. The other advantages of using YouTube is that it's free. It's available 24/7, so the videos keep gathering views. People can go watch them anytime. Unlike webinars where you have to schedule them, generally people have to attend. Of course, you can buy them and watch them later, which is a great advantage. With this, it's available 24/7. It's accessible all over the world, at least where they have good access to internet. That's one argument that we have to make. It's also mobile friendly, so people can see it on their phone, or on their desktop. The goal is that it's entertaining, and my hope is it's also practice changing. So I am not making videos for the sake of kind of filling up time. The goal is I only make these when I have something to say, and that's kind of been my drive. And as the evidence is, I haven't put out a lot. Basically, I've had 9 episodes, and I just finished recording the 10th, which we're editing and hoping to put out in January. The other thing that I'm interested in, I just use other examples that are out there, is I'm looking at adding commentaries like this one called Impact Factor, which I'd also recommend you check out. So this is Perry Wilson, who's a faculty here at Yale. He does this for Medscape. And every week, he's much more prolific. Every week, he puts out a 5-minute commentary video on a high-impact article that was published in one of the major medical journals, providing a summary of the article and his own insights on what it means for us. And he's covered all sorts of topics in medicine. So if you want another example to look at or somebody to follow, I highly recommend you look at the videos he's had. They're also available on YouTube and through Medscape. And the other one worth really mentioning is Mayo Clinic, who have an exceptional website that covers all sorts of topics. And these are like 6-minute videos to 30-second videos on all different topics that are, that would be important for patients. They explain things at a much simpler level about kidney disease, lymphoma. And it is worth mentioning, they've just recently reached over 1 million subscribers, which is a huge deal. And that's simply because they've obviously been active in putting out information that has been useful to a lot of people, whether it's healthcare professionals or patients. And so it's something to think about. As you mentioned, you have to consider who is your target audience. In my case, I don't obviously expect to even come close to that. I'm really focused on a niche field, and I'm using the platform more for spreading word to this small group of clinical chemists. But if you have a different interest, you can grow it much more. And this is just one example in healthcare that has really grown. So that really covers YouTube. What I want to say is ultimately that video is a more effective way to share science. And YouTube is one way to do it more broadly than it's currently done by publishing in scientific journals. So just to give you some tips, if you're a beginner and just kind of starting to look at this, you have to ask yourself if video is really the right format for you and the way you want to raise awareness about your work. Some may think, no, I'm fine writing articles and just, maybe giving interviews, but I don't really find that, doing videos about certain things in my lab would be helpful to raise awareness. I would argue you can find a lot of things that video can be helpful with. I can just think of several examples that we're not even using. Like if I say standard operating procedures, even you could argue you could make some elements of those in our laboratories become video-based. That would be much helpful for education. The other thing worth mentioning, if you're really going to go the YouTube route, is know your resources. Do you have funding and a media center that you could use? And I'll say, like here at Yale, when I looked into this, I found they have a broadcast and media center that's really great, and that's at a very reduced cost to faculty. And in my case, I'm using faculty funds to fund the use of the media center and the editing team that goes with it. Because I was simply looking for that high quality feel, and they really help with that. But some universities offer that for free. So you have media centers that are available at different places, for free that you could use. And even if you don't, as you've seen, you could do a lot of these things from your office with a good camera and like a microphone. That's really all you need. But I only share that to say, like, you may have options at your institutions that you're not aware of. If you're interested in exploring video, look to your media centers. Many of them are free. And so that's just one thing I do want to mention that was through my journey I learned about here, and I definitely took advantage of. And the other thing is find the format you like. And if you're really trying to do something, this only happens by watching what other scientists do and adopting or adapting it to your liking. I chose the format used by Last Week Tonight by John Oliver because I love watching it. To me, that was a form of communication I wished existed, so I created it. You may have other ways you consume information, and just look at how you look at news, how you keep up to date. So if there are ways you're doing it in your life regularly, why not create it so that it exists for our field and you can help with it? So kind of like that's just another thing I'd recommend. Like, you ultimately look at how you consume media and try to see if there's a need and create it there. And finally, like, I'm really simply in the experimental stage with this. Like I said, I've only had like 10 episodes now, but I'm trying different concepts, different length. So some videos can be 10 minutes, others have been 25 minutes, and I'm seeking feedback continuously. And as you've heard from Judith, you know, you don't want it too long and boring. You know, if you're looking for these short formats, you could have 3-minute videos, but in some cases there is a need for these longer videos, and there are interviews out there that are hours long. It all depends on the kind of context and your audience. That's why I say you really need to know your audience. Do they have time and do they have interest in watching these in-depth videos? And if the answer is no, then you may be wasting your time, but also you won't know until you try it and kind of get feedback from your audience and adjust. So switching gears now to Twitter for the last segment is, you know, as I mentioned, I'm overseeing Clinical Chemistry's Twitter handle, and this is just one example of how we share studies. And I want to mention, like, we basically always make sure there's an image from the study that's out there, and there's usually an explanation of what they did in some form, and we use hashtags in addition to the link. And this is one way where we try to simplify the message from the study and crystallize it as much as you can in a tweet. It's not always possible, and then sharing that with an image. In other cases, we end up actually simply highlighting the title just to kind of raise awareness that this is out there and the title is enough. Like if it's a short letter or a case, usually we don't go into as much detail. But for all articles, at least, that are published in the journal, we certainly put out a post with a small explainer that basically gets posted. And we have, and the beauty of this is we use a system, if anybody's interested in it, called Buffer to program all of these. And funny enough, actually, one post just came out as I'm giving the talk. I was starting to give this talk. It basically, because I programmed it to go at a certain time, and we do this, like, I can sit and do this for the whole month and make sure, like, when the issue is out, we program all of these out, so there's one coming out every day to keep this consistent kind of posting, and then every article gets its attention the day it goes out, because, you know, it doesn't help if you post 20 things in one day. People may not have that time that day and they'll miss the posts, whereas if you kind of try to spread them out, you have a higher chance of each getting the attention it deserves. And in addition, I mentioned Eric Topol, who again has over 600,000 followers. He basically posts these explainers, again debunking the myth of different things that were being touted during COVID. And the latest one here I'm showing is like the largest randomized trial showing that ivermectin doesn't work. And so he constantly does this, and that's another way, like, you could go with this, where you start posting images, analysis, and people interact with these. People react. I'll say it's a lot less in lab medicine, obviously, because we're a niche field, and so there's less people. So don't be discouraged if you don't get as many likes. I can tell you, even with the journal Clinical Chemistry, you know, on the best day, we get like 10, 15 likes on something we post. And for reference, like, we have around 11,000, 12,000 followers. New England Journal of Medicine, which has close to 100,000 or more, gets like 80 likes on theirs when they post something generally. So what I'm trying to say is there's not a lot of likes, but don't judge it by the likes, because they get a lot more views, and sometimes that can go up. It's usually in the thousands for every post we put out. And it's very important to recognize that, you know, the goal here is to raise awareness. They may not be geared towards increasing interaction in our case, but it's something we can certainly experiment with as well. But right now they're focusing on highlighting the articles we do. And Eric mentions, basically from his own experience, you know, post your own studies with an explainer thread that anyone can understand. And just so you know, an explainer thread is when you basically post a tweet and then you add like tweets under it, which you can do with Twitter now. You see these threads where people explain like every figure, every important analysis, and then you have a whole group of your peers engaging with you in a way that was not possible before. It's a way of basically having peer review post-publication, which is really awesome to have. Another important thing he mentioned that's important for us to track as young scientists who are kind of in the field and looking at this is altmetric, if you haven't heard of it. It's highly influenced by social media pickup, and it's clearly becoming another way for gauging impact of a researcher's work. Now, for clinical chemistry, every article, if you go into our website, and you look, you'll see like we track the number of citations, the number of views, and this altmetric. And in this case, this one is one of a very hot article we had. It's this number over 599. What does that mean? So if you click on altmetric, that circle, it gives you more detail on where your article is being shared and talked about, and it summarizes it by Twitter and news. Now, Twitter changed to X, by the way, the label, so this was older before that. So in this case, it says in red here, 18 news outlets picked up this article, and there are 18 tweets at the time this was taken that are going, and you can drill in detail and see each one. So I show here, like, these are which articles cited that specific, or which newsletters cited this specific article, and you can do the same with tweets, which I'm not going to show you. But the goal here is that there's a whole new way that we can keep track of what's happening with the work we're publishing, and altmetric is another important way to do that. And so the lesson I want to share here is that X, which is, again, Twitter, is a way scientists can promote their work and discuss their findings openly and rapidly with their communities. And if I was to give you tips for those of you who are beginners, I'd say, start by signing up and following other eminent scientists on Twitter and journals. Like, there's and every journal almost I can think of in our field now has an account. Some are more active than others. Again, with clinical chemistry, we post almost daily except the weekends. So I program for midweek. But to learn how to get better and start by following people in your group and kind of learn from their experience. You'd be surprised. Some scientists in their field have a lot more followers than even journals, and they're really like kind of sharing their work in a way that's very engaging, and they post regularly. So it's important. I think if you're really interested in career advancement and kind of helping share your work with others, it's a great way to do it. And again, if you can share your articles or whatever you're communicating in X threads, that's the best way to do it. So you can explain difficult concepts in several threads that are simplified. Include pictures, GIFs, or videos. It's very important because these generally get more likes than just text. So even when I'm sharing text, like I just showed you in those quotes I used, it's usually an image that's enlarged of it. So it's not like the regular Twitter text that's kind of people scroll through. Images tend to get a lot more likes. And then include links to the original article if you're sharing just kind of a part of it so people can access it and click on it. But that's also because when you do that, remember, it's being tracked by the altmetric on how it's being shared on Twitter. So when you share the link, that's how altmetric picks up the article is being discussed. And then when others reshare it, like it, all that promotes its use. And finally, and probably the most important thing I would say at this point, is hashtags are your best friend on Twitter, because that's how others who are not in your field may find it. And if you're posting in medicine, the most popular ones that you need to be aware of are MedTwitter and MedX. And also for lab medicine, LabMedX is the one that's growing and what we almost always use in clinical chemistry when we're posting our articles. And so finally, I already mentioned this, do not be discouraged by lack of significant likes or engagement with your work. And so I'll leave you with these final recommendations to say, just today, publishing your work in academic journals is not enough. Don't be afraid to experiment with social media, engage with your content and community, and choose a platform and start today. With that, I'll end here and happy to stay on till the end where we can take questions during the discussion. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Joe, for this inspiring and attractive